In our next story, I'm sharing it exactly as it was written. Dear listeners, I hope you're all doing well. I am David from Florida. The time was 5:47 a.m. in 2021. A mild tremor woke me from a light sleep. Before I could understand what was happening, the floor of my room where I sleep began to tremble again. As I opened my eyes and sat up, I could feel the tremors again and realized it was an earthquake. I had returned home late the previous night due to finishing some business work, which had delayed my sleep. As my light sleep was interrupted, I couldn't immediately think of what I should do in that moment. After sitting silently for a while, I noticed the earthquake had stopped and everything around me had fallen into a still silence. Without thinking much, I went back to sleep again. Doesn't this sound a bit strange to you? Why am I suddenly talking about an earthquake while telling a ghost story? Well, wait a little longer. Life was going pretty well for me. Even though I come from a middle-class family, I never felt a lack of anything. Love from my family, success, respect in society, I had it all together. But for some reason, God always seemed to test only me with difficult challenges. At first, I built a mountain of complaints against him, feeling a deep sense of grievance. But slowly, I began to understand that what was happening to me, or the difficult situations I was gradually sinking into, might not have been against his will. Perhaps you don't fully understand the point I'm trying to make. Maybe I'm becoming a bit too emotional, right? The truth is, there's a deep-seated pain in my heart. But let's leave that aside for now and get straight to the beginning. The time was early September 2021. I had a bad habit of smoking, so almost every night I would stand by the pond next to my house to smoke. In front of the pond stood a pair of palm trees that were around 50 to 60 years old. On the opposite side of where I stood was the main road of the area, and behind me was a bamboo grove. Inside that bamboo grove, there was a family cemetery. The strangest thing about the cemetery was that there were no adult graves, only the graves of small children. I had been smoking in that spot for almost 7 or 8 years, but I had never experienced any issues. One night, I went out to the pond again. While I was smoking, I suddenly felt like someone was walking around near me. My body also started to feel slightly heavy, but there shouldn't have been anyone around that late at night, especially during the time I usually went there. There was never anyone around at that time, so why was there someone now? Hearing the footsteps, I turned on the flashlight in my hand and searched the area, but I couldn't find anyone. I decided to head back home, but as I began walking, I had the distinct feeling that someone was following me. Yet there was no one around. I had just looked with my flashlight. So why was I suddenly feeling like this? I turned around to check, but once again I didn't see anyone. I dismissed it as just my imagination and returned home. For the next day or two, nothing unusual happened. One night, the same issue suddenly started again while I was standing by the pond. I felt like someone was walking around near me, but this time, it wasn't just one person. It felt like 2 or 3 people were around. Even though I turned on my torch to check, I couldn't see anyone. The situation started feeling strange to me, and a growing, unexplained fear began to take hold. Standing there, in the dark, with a clear mind, I could sense multiple presences around me, but I couldn't see them. And just when I began to feel a bit scared, something strange happened. As I was walking back home, I suddenly heard the faint sound of a woman crying. Hearing it startled me because, until then, everything had been completely silent. Why was I hearing this as I was about to leave? I started searching for the source of the crying sound, and my eyes fell on a bush near the edge of the pond. As I took a step closer, the crying became clearer. At that moment, memories of the old ghost stories my parents had told me about our area came flooding back. Many people had faced similar situations in the past, encountering different kinds of strange issues. I turned my torch towards the bush to get a better look, but I didn't have the courage to move any closer or listen to the sound more clearly. While I stood there, it felt like something invisible was surrounding me from all sides. I was most surprised by one thought. For so many years, I had been coming here at night, and nothing like this had ever happened. So why was this happening now? But more than the surprise, an unknown fear began to weaken me. I quickly started reciting prayers, and rushed back home without delay. The real strange events began happening that very night. After returning home, I got freshened up and prepared to sleep. It was around 12:30 or 1 a.m. when I lay down and tried to sleep. Maybe I had drifted off into a half sleep, but suddenly I saw three unfamiliar figures entering our house. They were dressed in black, but I couldn't clearly see their faces. Looking closely, I realized that these were not human beings. Their bodies were shaped like humans, but they had no hands, feet, or visible facial features, just three pitch-black figures. They signaled to each other and positioned themselves at three corners of our house, except the one near the main gate. I was utterly shocked. Who were they? How did they enter our house? I was so alarmed that I tried to speak to them, but in that moment, I couldn't muster the strength to talk or move. I could only watch as they kept shifting their positions around the house. Suddenly, I woke up. From that night onwards, I started feeling scared, whether it was day or night, whenever I was alone. I constantly felt like someone was around me, always watching me. But who was it? Was this really happening to me, or was it all just in my mind? These questions kept swirling in my head at every moment. After that night, I began having nightmares. In the dreams, those same three black figures would appear, standing in the three corners of our house, but the scene that unfolded afterward was something I'll never forget. After standing for a while, they suddenly began to destroy everything in the house. I tried my best to stop them, but some unknown force held me back, forcing me to be a silent observer. Once they finished wrecking the house, they suddenly appeared at my bedside, lifted me up, and threw me into the bathroom. Lying on the bathroom floor, I could clearly see all kinds of filth and dirt spilling out of my body. The room was filling up with the mess. While all this was happening, the three figures tried to force-feed me the filth. I struggled hard to escape, and my breathing started to become difficult. I was gasping, feeling like it would be my last day. But just when I thought it was over, they let me go. As they left, one of them gently stroked my head and in a thin and deep voice said together, "You should commit suicide. Do it, and you'll see all your problems disappear." Hearing that, I was overwhelmed with terror. Struggling for breath, I suddenly woke up, gasping. I felt like I had been given a second chance at life. But at that moment, I was trembling with fear, unable to understand what was happening to me. Who were they? Why did they want to kill me? These questions were weighing heavily on my mind. Still, I tried to console myself by saying it was just a nightmare. There was no other way for me to cope. I couldn't tell anyone because I knew they would laugh at me instead of helping, which might break me down mentally even further. So I didn't have the courage to share it with anyone. For a few days, nothing happened again. But after that, I kept seeing the same nightmare every single night, the same three figures, the same destruction. I also constantly felt their presence around me during the day. Sometimes, I could hear their voices whispering in my ear, urging me to commit suicide. They would say things like, "Hang yourself, take poison." Whenever I heard those words, my entire body would shiver in fear. I spent many nights without sleep. Every moment, I felt someone's presence in my room, and it always seemed like something terrible was about to happen. During this time, my family had started looking for a bride for me. In the first week, I met 2 or 3 potential matches and had conversations with their families. Everyone was very kind, but my family seemed particularly fond of one family, so they increased their interactions with them. One day, an agreement was reached for my marriage after a family visit to our house, but that evening, they suddenly called and said that due to a family issue, the wedding wouldn't be possible at the moment, and they needed some time. However, after that, we never heard from them again. This pattern continued, where many girls were considered for marriage, but after everything was settled, the weddings would mysteriously fall through. In the midst of this, my nightmares persisted. My health started to deteriorate, and within a few days, I became frail and lost a lot of weight. My skin also began to darken. One night, I had a dream where the 3 dark figures were standing in the same 3 corners of my house, just like before, and in the middle of my room stood an elderly woman. She wore a black sari with a red border, a thick streak of vermilion in her hair, a red bindi on her forehead, and a rudraksha necklace around her neck. In her right hand, she held a deep brown prayer bead, and in her left hand, a black stick. Without saying a word, she circled around my bed, looking at me with a horrifying smile. It was such a terrifying sight that words can't describe it. That was all of the dream, but after everything that had happened, I still couldn't bring myself to share these experiences with anyone. A few days later, another girl was considered for marriage, but once again, the same issue occurred. One afternoon, as I was about to start eating, my mother, while serving me food, suddenly said, "Babu, I'm feeling uneasy about you. We've seen so many girls for your marriage, and they all liked you so much. But why does the wedding keep falling through after everything is agreed upon? I'm starting to suspect that someone may be trying to stop your marriage with some sort of black magic or talisman, and your health has been getting worse too. You've lost so much weight." As a mother, she couldn't help but worry about her child. She asked me again if anything was really bothering me. I finally started to open up and tell her everything. I told her, "Mom, for some time now, I've been very scared at night. I can't go anywhere alone. I always feel like someone or something is lurking around me, watching my every move. I can't sleep, eat, or do anything properly." Hearing this, my mother became very anxious and quickly decided to consult a religious figure, a huzur. A few days later, my nephew, who had recently completed his hifz, memorization of the Quran, came to our house. Since he was now a hafiz, I shared my experiences with him and asked if he knew of any solution or someone who could help. He told me that while he didn't know how to deal with jinn or black magic, his senior teacher at the madrasa did, and he could arrange for me to speak with him. The next day, I tried to contact the teacher through my nephew, but his friend didn't have the teacher's number. However, after some searching, we managed to get the number, and I called the teacher, explaining my situation. After listening to me, he stayed silent for 2 minutes and then said things that shocked me because they were things only I and my family knew, and it was impossible for anyone else to know. After contacting the teacher, my problems gradually worsened. I lost my appetite and developed stomach issues, even vomiting without reason at times. My nightmares resumed, with the 3 dark figures, the jinn, standing in the corners of my house, changing positions frequently. I could feel something shaking me violently, disrupting everything inside my house. When the problem became unbearable, I went to a local religious leader and told him everything. After hearing my story, the religious leader gave me a talisman and a piece of paper with Quranic verses written on it, which he placed in a bottle of water to create blessed water. He instructed me to always keep the talisman with me and warned me not to remove it from my body. He also told me to drink the blessed water twice daily, once on an empty stomach in the morning and once right after the Maghrib prayer. After following these instructions, my condition started to improve. Though I still dreamed of the 3 jinn, they now appeared farther away from me. Slowly, I started to return to normal, and I wasn't as scared to go outside at night. Everything seemed to be going well. However, suddenly, a problem arose in our family. My elder brother became ill, and I had to go to a well-known hospital in Satkira for his tumor surgery. After his surgery, when he returned home, the doctor's prescription mentioned that if he experienced pain in the operated area, there was an injection listed that needed to be administered. That night, while I was freshening up, I distinctly noticed my talisman. After finishing up, it was around 11 p.m., and suddenly my brother started experiencing pain. In a panic, I rushed out to get the injection and a doctor since we couldn't administer the injection ourselves. I hurried back home with the injection and the doctor. Once the doctor gave him the injection, my brother felt better. I then stepped outside to escort the doctor out. On my way back, I stopped by the pond near our house to the east and began smoking a cigarette. While smoking, I noticed something strange. As I've mentioned before, there is a bamboo grove near our pond, and to the west of it, there is a small cemetery for children. I noticed that the bamboo from the grove seemed to be leaning over the road. I thought I was imagining things. I always carry a small torch in my pocket whenever I go out, so I took a few steps forward and shone the torchlight to check if the bamboo was actually bent over the road. After seeing that it really was, I didn't have the courage to stand there any longer. My entire body felt heavy again. I told my mother everything, and I drank the blessed water that the religious leader had given me. My mother and I searched everywhere for my talisman, but we couldn't find it. The next morning, after I woke up, my mother called me to her room. When I got there, I saw that she was holding my lost talisman. However, it looked like someone had tightly squeezed it in their fist, and the talisman was bent. When I asked my mother where she had found it, she said, I had gone out for some work, and on my way back home, for some reason, my eyes were drawn to the dustbin. That's where I found it. Out of curiosity, she picked it up and realized it was my talisman. I was shocked by her words. At first, I thought the talisman might have fallen off due to the shaking of the bike I had ridden the night before, but the strange thing was that the string was perfectly intact. I cleaned the talisman and wore it again. After wearing it, my problems started to subside again. However, after a few days, the issues began to intensify once more. Out of frustration, I removed the talisman and threw it into the pond near our house. When nothing else seemed to work, I posted about my issue in a paranormal group online on the evening of September 29th last year. After reading my post, my colleague Mustafa Alam Roman reached out to me. He shared some information about the symptoms of black magic, and 80% of what he described matched my experiences. He then gave me the phone number of a Hafiz, Islamic scholar, named Moinuddin, and advised me to contact him quickly. Hafiz Moinuddin was a very busy man, and despite trying for several days, I couldn't get in touch with him. One afternoon, between 3 and 3:30 p.m., I finally managed to speak with him. I told him everything that had been happening, and he explained that such problems wouldn't be understood easily. To diagnose the issue, he instructed me to light an incense stick that night, stay pure, perform ablution, turn off all the lights in my room, and sleep. He said that he would send a guest to my house that night. Following his instructions, I got the incense stick. By 1 or 1:20 a.m., I still hadn't fallen asleep, because my room was in one corner of the house, right next to my parents' room. But that night, my parents were staying at my sister's house, so I was completely alone in that corner of the house. At night, I called Moinuddin Bai and asked if it would be a problem if I stayed up late. He replied that it wouldn't be an issue, but I should still follow his instructions before going to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I performed ablution, lit an incense stick, and covered the router and other devices in my room with black tape. Following his instructions, I wanted to keep the room completely dark, and then I fell asleep. While sleeping, I felt like someone came near me, gently stroked my head, lifted me from the bed, and placed a pillow behind my back to make me sit up. This person then started talking to me, and I found myself explaining all my problems to him. The next morning, I went outside and got busy with my work. From that day on, I couldn't contact Hafiz Moinuddin Bai for almost 15 or 16 days. During this time, the final exam form fill-up date for my university approached. As usual, I took some money and set out for the university in a rickshaw with a large bag where I always kept my wallet. However, when I reached the university, I couldn't find my wallet. Since it was the last date for form fill-up, I was in a bit of a crisis. But by Allah's grace, I somehow managed to complete the form fill-up. A few days later, I finally got to speak with Moinuddin Bai again. I told him everything that had happened, and he said that when he sat for the milad, a religious gathering, to help me, something strange happened. After looking at my picture, he suddenly felt extremely disturbed and thought to himself, "Is this the person I've been talking to? Such a horrible, dark, and repulsive person?" He then threw my picture away. After coming to his senses, he realized what he had done and told himself, "What am I doing? This is a person I know, a brother in need of help. I must assist him." Upon hearing this, I told him that this wasn't surprising to me. Almost everyone I spoke with eventually grew irritated with me, and even my friends no longer talked to me properly. Moinuddin Bai listened and then informed me that a few days earlier, our respected Gholam Rabbi Bai had met him regarding a problem with his daughter. During their conversation, Moinuddin Bai brought up my case and said that a very serious and powerful black magic had been cast on me. He warned that I was in grave danger, my situation would gradually deteriorate, and I would become mentally devastated. I wouldn't be able to progress in any of my work. Moinuddin Bai explained that the jinn through which the black magic was cast wouldn't let him come near me, nor would it allow me to go to him. Nevertheless, he promised to visit my house as soon as possible to try to resolve the issue. My life continued in this miserable state, facing one problem after another. The situation had become unbearable for me. My mother then decided to contact another Huzur, religious leader, in our area. He was known to everyone as Kalo Huzur, the Black Huzur. Kalo Huzur used to see patients every day after the Asr prayer, and I wanted to meet him too. However, fate had other plans, and I could never get in touch with him. Every time I planned to visit him, something would go wrong. One day, I thought of going to him without informing my mother. I asked her to come with me, telling her that we had some work and that it wouldn't take long. I took my mother to the Huzur's house, but once again, I lost. When we arrived, we found out that the Huzur wasn't home. After visiting his house 5 or 6 times, I still couldn't meet him. Even though I contacted many other Huzurs, they all said the same thing, that I had been cursed with bad black magic. I met an old friend of mine after about 7 or 8 months, and when he asked about my situation, I told him everything. He introduced me to another Huzur, and even this Huzur said that I had been badly affected by black magic. But the most surprising thing was that every time I told someone about my problems, the night after, their families would begin experiencing the same problems. Strangely, I wouldn't face any issues that night. Because of this, many people stopped talking to me. Even when they saw me on the street, they would ignore me. Now, let me tell you what that Huzur said that shocked me. After listening to my problems, he remained silent for 2 minutes and then asked me 2 questions. The first question was, "Didn't you lose your phone? How did you get it back?" The second was, "Why did you reject that girl the other day?" Hearing these questions, I was shocked. How did he know that I had lost my phone when I hadn't told anyone about it? I had indeed lost my phone. Since I was scared at night, I used to play Surah Yasin at full volume on my phone to protect myself from any harm. One night, after all of this had started, I was sleeping with Surah Yasin playing on my phone. Suddenly, I woke up in the middle of the night and felt my body had become strangely heavy, and my room was filled with an eerie silence. But I had left Surah Yasin playing on my phone at full volume, so where was my phone? I usually sleep on the floor, so there was no chance that my phone had fallen somewhere. However, no matter how hard I searched, I couldn't find my phone. For some reason, I couldn't even turn on the lights, and I was shaking with fear. Desperately, I felt around my entire bed to find my phone. After searching for a while, I finally felt something solid under my right hand. It was my phone, but it wasn't playing Surah Yasin. Puzzled, I lifted it to my ear, and as soon as I did, the sound of Surah Yasin suddenly blasted at full volume into my ears. I thought, how is it possible that the surah was playing so loudly, and yet I hadn't heard it all this time? I told these things to Huzur. I'll also share what I told him about the girl, but you'll have to wait a bit for that, because the main twist of the story lies ahead. For now, let me take you back in time. Hearing my story, Huzur took a deep breath and asked, "Did anything happen a few days ago?" His question reminded me of the earthquake on April 8, 2021, at 9:05 p.m. I hadn't felt it, but I saw the news on Facebook. Another earthquake occurred at 5:47 a.m. on April 26, which I had felt personally. I told this to Huzur. He asked if my problems had started after that, and when I confirmed, he sighed deeply, becoming serious. "Listen, son," he said, "you've been hit with very bad black magic. This type of magic usually involves using soil and hair, and that's exactly what has been done to you." Hearing this from Huzur left me shocked. A thought occurred to me. I was quite active on an online platform where I'd recorded a video of myself for a post. In that video, I noticed that a round spot on the left side of my head seemed to have had some hair cut off. At first, I thought it was some clinical issue. I consulted a doctor about it, but the doctor told me that it wasn't caused by any medical condition. My hair had been cut. Huzur's words made everything clear. I understood why and how this had happened. Huzur continued, saying that the black magic had been done by a Hindu woman who practiced witchcraft and that the girl's family had hired her to perform the spell. Every word from Huzur astonished me. A female sorcerer. Was this the old woman I had seen in my dream? Hearing all of this made my heart tremble, so I asked Huzur for help. He told me, "Look, son, I have everything necessary to help you, but there's one thing you'll need to get: the hide of a deer." Upon hearing this, I wanted to discuss it with my family, but after that, I lost contact with Huzur. I tried many times, but his phone was always off, and my nephew had enrolled in a different madrasa, so it became impossible for me to get in touch with him again. But before we lost contact, Huzur warned me, "If you don't resolve this issue in time, people will gradually become irritated with you and distance themselves." And now, with each passing day, Huzur's words are proving true. During this time, stranger things began to happen around me. For instance, I started seeing 3 black cats outside my room. They would roam around the area from evening until I fell asleep. As long as they were nearby, I didn't feel any problems. One evening, out of curiosity, I went out with a torch to look for them. Sure enough, they were sitting right outside my room. When I tried to get closer to them with the torch, they ran off. Initially, I took it lightly, but after returning to my room, something struck me. I had shone the torch at them, but I didn't see their shadows. This realization sent chills through me. I looked for them outside again, but they were gone, and I never saw them around my house after that. Now let me get to why I had pushed the girl away. To understand this, we need to go 3 years back in time, to 2019. I was then working as a moderator for a popular regional group in Jessore. I had been moderating for about a year when the group needed new moderators. After posting about the opening, many people applied, one of whom was Sajudi. Our group had a rule that new moderators would be added to a messenger group where we would explain their duties and engage in discussions. As per this rule, Sajudi was added to the group, and I was given the responsibility of explaining the tasks to her. However, unfortunately, we got into a disagreement during a comment thread on one of the group's posts, and I ended up blocking her on Facebook. A few days later, the group admin asked in the messenger group who had blocked Sajudi, because every time she tried to rejoin, she received a notification saying someone had blocked her. For context, Facebook Messenger has a feature where if someone who's blocked tries to join a group, they get a notification saying, "You've been blocked by someone in this group. Would you like to ignore it and join?" I messaged the group admin privately, letting them know that I had blocked her and wouldn't unblock her. Days went by, and then, on July 30th, Friendship Day, I was in a good mood and decided to unblock a few people from my Facebook block list, Sejuti being one of them. I messaged her, saying, "Let's forget about our past issues. Can we be good friends?" To my surprise, she responded positively, and we began a good friendship. We texted regularly on Messenger, but we never talked on the phone or even did audio calls on Messenger. Days passed, and eventually, I found out that Sejuti lived in my area in Jessore, only a 5-minute walk from my house. Even though her family lived there, she stayed outside of town for her studies. She told me that she would be coming to Canada in a few days because her father was returning to Canada after a long time, and she wanted to spend time with him. She also expressed her desire to meet me when she returned to Canada. However, there was one condition: we could only see each other from a distance and could not speak, as her father would be with her. After a few days, she arrived in Canada, and they went shopping at a mall called City Plaza. She did all her shopping there. For the first time, we saw each other from a distance. To be honest, she was unbelievably beautiful. After that, we met several more times from a distance. At some point, we started talking about being in a relationship. It became clear to me that she was developing feelings for me. Slowly, she began giving me various hints about wanting to be in a relationship, but I would ignore them and avoid the topic. On September 7th, my birthday was approaching. A few days before that, she proposed to me. I told her, "Look, it's not possible for me to be in a relationship." When she asked why, I explained, "Your family is very rich, and my family is middle class. Our families would never match. Besides, I've always seen you as a friend, not as a romantic partner. I'm sorry, but I can't get into a relationship with you." She then started pressuring me to reconsider, but I told her again, "Listen," said Jyoti, "I've been in a relationship before, and I was badly hurt. I don't trust anyone easily anymore. You're just a friend to me, nothing more." However, she insisted, saying, "I love you from the bottom of my heart, Arif. Please accept my feelings." I didn't respond to her after that. I should also mention that her family had a bad reputation in our area, and the locals didn't look kindly upon them. Because of this, I knew my family would never accept a relationship with her. Plus, I truly only saw her as a friend. A day or two before my birthday, she called me and said, "Arif, I'm out of town. My little sister has exams, and tomorrow my mom needs to see a doctor. Can you take her to the hospital?" Because she asked me to help her mom, I couldn't refuse, and I agreed. The next morning, I took her mother to the doctor. After the appointment, she asked me to go shopping with her, and after finishing, she handed me a bag and said, "Here, Arif, these are for you." Inside the bag, I found an orange t-shirt and a blue Punjabi. I told her, "Auntie, I can't accept these," but she interrupted, saying, "You're like my son. A mother can give her son a gift on his birthday, can't she? Take it. It's an early birthday present." Since she insisted, I eventually agreed to take the gifts and returned home. After that, Sajoti's feelings for me seemed to grow even stronger. She began pressuring me more and more to enter into a relationship. She couldn't understand why someone as beautiful as her, who had a line of boys after her, would be rejected by me. Her ego was hurt, and this only made her more determined. But I kept ignoring her advances. Then the mental torment began. She would threaten to commit suicide, stop eating for days, and blackmail me, saying that if I didn't agree to be in a relationship, she would call my mother and say terrible things. Since she was threatening to speak to my mother, you might wonder how she got my mother's number. After she introduced me to her mother as a friend, she had asked to speak to my mom, and I once called her from my mom's phone. I introduced her to my mom as a friend, not realizing that this mistake would lead to me being blackmailed later. As I endured this intense mental pressure, I started avoiding her calls and messages regularly. One day, I suddenly got a call from her mother. She asked me to come to their house, saying that something had happened. I asked her what was wrong, but she just told me to come over first. Without thinking much, I went to their house. When I arrived, I saw Sajoti sitting on the sofa with her sister beside her. As usual, her father wasn't home due to work. Her mother let me in and sat me down, saying, "Look, son, Sajoti's madness is getting worse. She hasn't eaten in days. A little while ago, she tried to hang herself. Thankfully, I saw her in time and saved her." At this, Sajoti turned to me and said, "Arif, I want a relationship. What's wrong with me? Am I not pretty enough? Then why won't you agree?" I replied, "I've always seen you as a friend, Sajoti, nothing more. I can't enter into a relationship with you. I'm sorry." She kept pressuring me, and then her younger sister angrily interjected, "What's your problem, sister? The guy doesn't want a relationship, so why are you forcing him?" After that, a huge argument broke out between her and her mother. Seeing such a serious argument, I made an excuse to leave. Her mother stopped arguing and took me outside. She took me aside and said, "Arif, you're like a son to me. Will you do me a favor?" I asked her what it was, and she said, "Pretend to be in love with her for a little while. Can't you see? I'm her mother. How can I bear to see her like this? Please, just act for a while, and once she's stable, I'll talk to her and end it. I promise." Seeing her mother's desperate plea, I told her, "All right, Auntie, but if she causes any more trouble after this, it'll be your responsibility." Then I left. From that night onward, I started being nicer to Sajoti and told her I'd be in a relationship with her. But soon after, she began imposing more conditions, like making me talk to her all night on the phone and constantly calling her. These demands made me angry again, and I started ignoring her once more. That night, I lay in bed, thinking about everything. I was under so much mental stress that I couldn't tell anyone, but I also couldn't bear it anymore. Maybe she wanted to prevent a problem between my mom and family. I brushed off these thoughts and focused on the conversation. After 2 hours, Sajuti's mom called me again. She called twice, but I didn't answer. On the third call, I broke the promise I made to my mother and picked it up. Sajuti's mom said, "Arif, there's a problem. Come to the house." I replied, "I can't." But she kept pleading with me, and I decided that today I would go and end everything once and for all. I was scared, though, thinking that they might try to blackmail me again. Pushing those thoughts aside, I left for Sajuti's house. When I entered, I saw her sitting on the sofa, just like before. Her mother welcomed me inside and told me that Sajuti had attempted suicide again, but her younger sister had caught her trying to tie a scarf around her neck. She was saved once more. Sajuti started pressuring me about getting into a relationship again. I felt irritated and was about to say something when her mother said, "Arif, you look like you haven't eaten anything all day, and neither has Sajuti. You two sit down, and I'll bring some snacks." Then she left the room. As soon as her mother left, Sajuti grabbed my legs and started begging me to accept her, saying, "Arif, what do you want? A car, house, money? I'll give you everything. Just accept me." Hearing this, I pulled her away from me and called for her mother to come back. I explained everything to her. That night, Sajuti called me for the last time. She told me, "Arif, I won't come back into your life anymore. I've caused you enough trouble. I did truly love you, but now I'm leaving. However, after today, I won't let you live happily. You won't be happy anymore, I promise." Since that day, I haven't spoken to Sajuti, but why did she tell me that she won't let me be happy, and why am I truly not happy now? On the day I first met Sajuti's mother, she had asked me if I could find an English tutor for her younger daughter who was preparing for her SSC exams. I introduced them to a tutor who happened to be Hindu. Over time, the family developed a strong relationship with the tutor. One Saturday evening, I met that tutor on the street and asked him, "Sir, what brings you here?" He replied, "I came to visit a friend's house, and I also brought Sajuti's mother to meet with Guruma." I asked, "Who is Guruma, and why did Sajuti's mother go to see her?" He then explained, "Guruma is a tantric. Sajuti's mother has been facing a lot of family problems, and she strongly believes in charms and talismans. She told me that her husband doesn't come home, doesn't care for the family, doesn't give her money, and when he is home, he gets angry. She asked me if I knew any tantric, so I introduced her to Guruma. Guruma is a highly respected person, and people in my area have great faith in her. She can solve any problem." That's when it all made sense to me. I realized that Guruma was a black magician, and I understood why all these strange things had been happening to me. Everything became clear, but I could say the story ends here. However, I can't, because it hasn't ended. Things are still getting worse, and the problems I'm facing are growing bigger. I don't know how or when it will all end, but I ask everyone to pray for me so that I can return to a normal life soon. Before I end, I want to share a special message for everyone listening to my story. Life and love don't always give you good things. I now truly understand how dangerous one-sided love can be. Only the person going through it can fully realize how helpless and painful it is. So I ask you, please don't make anyone's life miserable for the sake of love. Never harm someone this badly, stirred, not even your worst enemy. Allah will not forgive you for that. And that was Arif's story, but it isn't over yet. I still have more to share from my own experiences. Now, I'll talk about Mustafa Alam Roman. As I mentioned earlier, I have also been affected by this story in certain ways. I never imagined that I would go through something like this. Let me start from the beginning. I first learned about this situation through a Facebook post last year on the evening of September 29th. Many people are confused about the existence of ghosts in the world. I used to be too, but not anymore. When an incident comes from someone close, there's no room for disbelief because these people wouldn't lie about such things without reason. I am Tom, and as a listener, I want to share a recent event that was told to me. The story takes place in a village near Texas City. Due to certain reasons, I won't mention the exact location or the real names of the people involved. A colleague of mine shared this incident, which happened around 1994, and it was well known among the locals. For a long time, people in the area were afraid to move around the place, especially near the spot where the event took place. To protect the identity of those involved, I will use pseudonyms. The story is about my colleague's uncle and aunt. Both were devout individuals who regularly prayed. It was winter, and they were going through an ordinary day. They were busy with work the whole day, and by the evening, the aunt was sweeping the house as she usually did. Why she was sweeping will become important later. Night fell, and for some reason, the aunt felt uneasy. But everything seemed fine until the call for fire, dawn prayer. Like always, the aunt woke up at the sound of the call to prayer and got ready for her morning prayer. They used to perform ablution at a tube well nearby, which required a few pumps to get warm water from the pond. The tube well was close to their house, so she went without waking her husband. Some time passed, and the sound of the tube well woke the uncle. He usually got up soon after, but was feeling a bit lazy and stayed in bed. He thought to himself, once she's back, I'll go out and perform my ablution too. Typically, it only took a couple of minutes to pump the water, at most 5 minutes. But this time, the sound of pumping continued for about 15 minutes, which he found odd. He thought, why is she still pumping water? Worried, he grabbed a torch and went outside to check. He wondered, has she lost her mind? What's going on? When he reached the tube well, he was shocked to see the handle of the tube well still moving slightly and a bit of water dripping from it, as if someone had just stopped pumping. But his wife was nowhere to be found. A sense of dread crept in. He called out, "Rumi, Rumi," but received no response. Suddenly, he heard a rustling noise from a nearby tree branch. When he looked, he saw something terrifying. 2 legs were dangling from the tree, swaying between the branches, making a sound like something was climbing up and down. The most horrifying part was that the legs were twisted in an unnatural direction, and the figure's face was indistinguishable. His heart raced, and his chest tightened in fear. He began shouting louder and louder. Then, from a distance, he heard his wife screaming, "Help me! Save me! They're taking me!" He panicked and ran with the torchlight, following the sound of her voice. He could hear her scream continuously, but couldn't see her mouth, except for something pulling her rapidly toward the paddy field. Whatever it was dragging her at a tremendous speed. At one point, it seemed like she was being lifted off the ground, and then suddenly, she vanished from sight. Her screams also stopped abruptly. He couldn't see anything in the darkness, and the fear was overwhelming. His body trembled as he realized he might have lost her. He kept calling out, but the only sound he heard was his own voice echoing back. Suddenly, he heard a thud in the distance, as if something had fallen. He rushed over and found his wife lying unconscious on the ground. When he tried to touch her, she suddenly pushed him back with incredible force, throwing him far away. It was impossible for a woman or even a strong man to push someone that far. Exhausted and terrified, he felt as if something was pulling him inside the darkness, but he couldn't see anyone. He fainted shortly after. When he regained consciousness, he found himself lying in bed, surrounded by family and relatives. Everyone was worried and asking him about what had happened. He immediately asked about his wife, and they assured him she was fine. However, after the incident, her behavior remained slightly abnormal for a while. Even though my uncle seemed normal after the incident, they called a religious scholar, Huzur, to the house. After taking some initial steps, the Huzur asked my uncle, "Does your wife ever sweep in the southwest direction during the evening?" My uncle admitted that he had never noticed this. The Huzur then said, "That's what caused the problem. She was regularly doing this, and they didn't like it, so this happened." The Huzur further explained that it was the work of a jinn. Later, when my aunt fully recovered, she acknowledged the issue, and from that point on, she never swept in the same way again. I don't know if there's any logic behind this, but perhaps there isn't. Have you ever heard of such things? It reminds me of the belief that you shouldn't walk between 2 houses during dusk. There's also a common saying that if you see a snake inside your house, you shouldn't kill it right away, which has a religious basis. Another thing I've heard, and try to follow, is advice from the scholar Sheikh bin Baz, may Allah have mercy on him. He was once asked if pouring hot water down a basin could disturb the jinn. Bin Baz replied, "Yes, it can. Before pouring hot water onto the ground or into a basin, recite specific verses so that any jinn living there can move away." He also said that he once visited a man who was possessed, and when they asked the jinn why he was tormenting the man, the jinn replied, "He poured hot water down the basin and killed my child who was living in the pipe." They responded, but he didn't know you were there." The jinn answered, "Why didn't he recite Bismillah? If he had, we would have been warned and moved away." Before pouring hot water anywhere, it's important to recite these powerful verses to warn any beings residing there. I don't know what you think of this story, but I hope you found it interesting. My colleague has shared more stories with me, and if you like this one, I'd be happy to share the rest. Also, if you have any paranormal stories, feel free to write them down or send a recording. I'm reading this exactly as it was written. Before I begin the story, let me introduce myself. I'm an American, working in some government military service. Due to the nature of my job, I get posted in various locations across the US, and that's how I ended up in Texas. I was stationed at a barracks in an old part of Houston, which was located on a hill. Because of its location, the area had a mix of natural beauty and an eerie atmosphere, especially with the nearby forest. My duty shift ran from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., divided into 2-hour rotations. The incident I'm about to share happened during one of these shifts, when I was scheduled to work from midnight to 2 a.m. As usual, I prepared myself and left for my duty post about 15 minutes early. It's worth mentioning that the distance between the barracks and our duty post was around 800 meters, which I had to walk through a moderately dense forest. I reached my post on time and took over the duty from my colleague, who then left. Since I was new to the area and unfamiliar with the surroundings, I thought I'd take a little walk around to familiarize myself with the place. When I worked alone, I usually played music on my phone through earbuds, so I tried to do the same that night. However, though the music app was playing, there was no sound. I tried playing something else, and this time the sound worked fine. I didn't think much of it and assumed there was a glitch with the music app. I decided to spend my 2-hour shift exploring the area around my post. I figured it would help me get to know the surroundings better. With that plan in mind, I grabbed my flashlight and began walking around. At one point, my attention was drawn to a pond behind the post. There was a row of banyan, mango, karai, and coconut trees around it. The sight was beautiful, especially with the moonlight casting shadows on the pond's surface, creating a mesmerizing scene. I was admiring the view, unaware that my wonder would soon turn into fear. Suddenly, I noticed a large white cat jump out of the pond with a fish in its mouth and climb up a banyan tree. At first, I thought I must be seeing things. I quickly aimed my flashlight at the tree, and when the light hit the cat's eyes, they glowed like two flames staring directly at me. The cat, seemingly angry, dropped the fish from its mouth and leaped from one tree to another before disappearing into thin air. I was immediately shaken by what I had just seen. I began reciting prayers and blowing on my chest for protection. Just then, I snapped back to reality when I heard a human voice behind me. It was my colleague, who had come to relieve me for the shift change. He was a bit startled to find me standing by the pond and told me that it wasn't safe to be there alone, especially not at night. I asked him why he had come so early, but he replied that he had arrived on time. I checked my watch and saw that it was 2:03 a.m. I was astonished because I felt like I had only been on duty for 30 minutes at most. How had 2 hours gone by? I didn't share what had happened with my colleague because I was new, and I didn't want anyone to take it the wrong way. I handed over my responsibilities and headed back to my room. After changing my clothes, I went to the washroom to freshen up before going to bed. Our barracks were old, having been built decades ago, and the washroom had a large mirror above the basin where everyone could use it at the same time. As I splashed water on my face, I glanced at the mirror, and to my horror, I saw someone standing behind me. The figure had a human body, but a cat's face, and it was holding a fish in its mouth. When our eyes met in the mirror, it smiled at me and dropped the fish from its mouth. At that moment, I couldn't decide whether to be scared or to run. Somehow, I gathered myself and bolted out of the washroom, running back to my room. I kept thinking, what is happening to me? The room I stayed in was small, and 3 of us shared it. One roommate was on leave, and the other was on duty, so I was alone. Since it was a cold night, I got into bed and wrapped myself in a blanket, trying to calm down. It's worth mentioning that after 10 p.m., we weren't allowed to keep the lights on in our room. Since I didn't know anyone well in this new place, I didn't have anyone to call or share the incident with. Somehow, I managed to control myself and tried to sleep, although an unknown fear lingered in my mind. I had been very tired throughout the day, and knowing that I had to wake up early in the morning, I tried my best to fall asleep. At some point, while tossing and turning, I dozed off without realizing it. Suddenly, I woke up with a feeling of pressure on my chest. When I opened my eyes, I saw someone sitting on my chest, whispering that they wanted to eat fish and asking me to bring fish to the pond. They said they had been waiting for me by the pond and were calling me there again. With all these strange events happening one after another, I became extremely scared. I tried to lift the blanket to see what was happening, but I couldn't move my hands or legs. I attempted to scream, but no words came out of my mouth. I started reciting Ayatul Kursi, but the pressure didn't ease. Then, I began reciting Surah Falaq, Surah Nas, and Surah Ikhlas. Eventually, I felt the weight on my chest lift, and I immediately sat up. When I looked at the clock, it was 3:33 a.m. Knowing that my roommate would return around 4 a.m., I stayed awake, reciting prayers. When my roommate finally arrived and saw me sitting up, he was quite surprised. I didn't tell him what had happened, simply saying that I had a bad dream, which had woken me up. That night, I somehow made it through by lying down and waiting until morning. Since it was Thursday, and we had 2 days of public holidays coming up, I applied for leave, citing family issues. My leave request was approved, and I went home. After reaching home, I shared the incident with my mother. She took me to a religious leader, Huzur, who observed me for a while and learned everything through his connection with jinns. He told me that 7 jinns had been living by that pond for many years. That night, one of them, in the form of a cat, had been fishing for food in the pond, but I had disturbed it with my flashlight, preventing it from eating the fish. This had angered the jinn. It had wanted to drown me in the pond right then and there, but my colleague had arrived, which is why it couldn't harm me at the time. After that, it followed me to the washroom and into my room, trying to harm me. The Huzur gave me a protective amulet, tawiz, and advised me to carry it with me while on night duty and keep it under my bed when sleeping. Since then, I haven't experienced any major problems. I'm not sure how scary this story sounds, but even now, thinking about that dark night sends chills through my body. To this day, whenever I go to that post, I don't have the courage to go out alone. That was my experience. If you like the story, I'll be happy to share more in the future. Please forgive any mistakes in the writing. Thank you. Thank you very much for sending your story. To all of you listening today, we sincerely thank you for joining us and for supporting us in this way. It's because of your participation that we are motivated to come back again with more. Please let us know how you felt about today's story. With that, I'm wrapping up today's episode. Stay well, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay with Shadows of Unknown USA. Hello, listeners. My name is Alex Copper, and today I will be sharing a story with you which took place in the Orlando village of Florida. This story happened to the uncle of one of my friends. The incident is from 30 to 35 years ago. I'm sharing the story exactly as my friend told it to me. My friend's father's name is Daniel Copper, who from the day he was born caught the attention of a fairy or female jinn. It was winter when Daniel Copper was born. Not only was his family overjoyed, but the entire village was filled with happiness because Daniel Copper was an exceptionally beautiful baby. There was no other baby as beautiful in the whole village. After 5 daughters, Daniel Copper was the only son, which made his arrival even more special. However, this beauty became a curse for Daniel Copper. So many people came to see him that by evening, the crowd had overwhelmed the house. To manage the situation, they brought Daniel Copper out into the courtyard a little before sunset for everyone to see. That evening marked the beginning of the strange events. Around midnight, the sound of a baby crying was heard. Daniel Copper's mother woke up to find her baby floating in the air, slowly moving toward the door. In fear, she screamed, and Daniel Copper fell to the ground. The next morning, they called a local healer. The healer explained that the fairy had been attracted to Daniel Copper when he was taken out at sunset, and she had come at night to take him away. The healer performed some rituals and gave them some protective talismans. After that, no more strange incidents occurred for several years. But when Daniel Copper turned 14, another problem arose. One afternoon, while fishing with 2 or 3 friends, Daniel's friends noticed him talking to someone who wasn't there. When his friends informed Daniel Copper's parents, Daniel told them he was talking to a girl that only he could see. Concerned, the family called the healer again. The healer gave Daniel more talismans and instructed him to always keep them on. However, the interesting part is that Daniel grew fond of the fairy or the girl, so he removed all the talismans. His family was upset with him, but Daniel paid no attention to their concerns. As time passed, when Daniel turned 20, he refused to let anyone enter his room, and a sweet fragrance always lingered around his room. Despite his family's many attempts to convince him, Daniel continued to reject the talismans, insisting that he wanted the fairy or the female jinn to communicate with him. That's how things unfolded. At that point, the family decided that Daniel Copper should be married. However, a major issue arose. Whenever someone came to see Daniel for a marriage proposal, a problem would occur on the way. It seemed that every time the potential bride's family traveled to meet him, some sort of large issue would arise, preventing them from reaching Daniel's house. As word of this spread through the village, no one from any family dared to come with a marriage proposal for Daniel anymore. Daniel Copper did not work, nor did he speak to anyone in the house. During meals, he would take his food and eat in his room, always keeping the door shut. One day, Rafi, Daniel's brother, noticed that Daniel had forgotten to lock his room when he went for a walk in the park. Seizing the opportunity, their mother quietly entered the room. What she saw shocked her. Inside Daniel's room, a photograph was hanging on the wall. It was one of those old-fashioned black and white negative photographs. The image appeared to be of a man and a woman, but the figures were indistinct, just like dark shadows. It was impossible to tell who the man or the woman was. Even more astonishing, the entire room was filled with different kinds of leaves, flowers, and plants, and there was a sweet fragrance lingering in the air. Fearing that Daniel might return soon, his mother quickly left the room. When Daniel came home and entered his room, he became furious within 2 minutes. He stormed out and angrily asked, "Why did you enter my room, mother? I had told you not to come in. Even though I forgot to lock the door, why did you enter?" No one had told Daniel that anyone had entered his room, nor had anyone seen his mother go inside. Yet somehow Daniel knew she had been there, which left the family baffled. Daniel then said, "Don't try to arrange any marriage for me. I am already married. I have a wife and children, and I have my own family. Stop worrying about my marriage. I am already married and want to live this way." Sometimes, the family would hear the sound of a baby crying from Daniel's room, or the voice of a woman, or even many voices talking at once. The family occasionally saw or heard these things, but never confronted him about it. One day, there was a lot of screaming and noise coming from Daniel's room. Although he had told his family that no matter what happened, they were not to call for him or enter his room, the family was frightened but obeyed his instructions. The next day, when it was almost noon, Daniel still hadn't come out of his room. The family called out to him, but there was no response. When they broke down the door, they found Daniel Copper dead. The cause of his death remained unknown. When they took Daniel's body to the cemetery to bury him, something interesting happened there as well. When Daniel was being buried, something strange happened. During his funeral, an unexpectedly large crowd gathered. In the village, everyone knows each other. It's not like the city, where people might not know their neighbors. However, most of the people who attended Daniel's funeral were unfamiliar to the villagers. After the burial, a few villagers asked these unknown people where they were from and where they lived, but the strangers gave no answers and left quietly without speaking to anyone. Another bizarre incident occurred after Daniel was buried. On the first night after the burial, someone attempted to take his body from the grave. Whether it was an attempted grave robbery or something supernatural remains unclear, but a few individuals tried to remove his corpse. When the villagers realized what was happening, they took extra precautions to protect his grave. For over a month, the villagers guarded Dinal's grave, fearing that someone would try to steal his body. Each time someone left the gravesite unattended, someone else would attempt to take his body from the grave. This is my story. Thank you, and I hope you all stay well. I am John Jr., and something happened to me a few days ago, so why not share it with you? After listening to the episode of Hide and Seek, I decided to record my story. First, let me introduce myself. Since childhood, I've had a deep interest in paranormal activities. I always wanted to know more about it, even now. I wonder how these things happen, how they work. Because of this curiosity, I've had an interest in things like spirits, black magic, etc. Even now, I still have that curiosity. After listening to ghost stories and shows like Shadows of the Unknown USA, I feel like I have a decent understanding of how these things work or don't work. Anyway, my interest was limited to that. There's also something else to mention. In my religion, none of this is considered legitimate, right? So I always kept my distance and explored my curiosity in a safe way, reading about things, watching documentaries, and that's it. Another thing about me is that I'm a professional dancer. Along with my studies, I've been dancing since I was a kid. Because of my dancing, people around me know me, and it's normal in artistic communities for people to recognize you. Many people would come to me, even now, asking to learn from me. It's a very normal thing for me. I've always welcomed them. One day, this kid suddenly approached me, saying he wanted to learn dancing. I said okay, welcomed him, and taught him for a few days. This was about 4, 5, or maybe even 6 months ago, possibly during the lockdown. After teaching him for a while, we became close. He was like a younger brother to me. One evening, we were talking in a park near our area. Another friend of mine was also with us. While we were chatting, this kid told me that he had recently started practicing black magic. I was shocked. Since I've had an interest in paranormal things, I knew quite well what black magic was. I was surprised. He told me that recently his guru had taught him some of it, and that guru had recently passed away, who also lived near us. Out of curiosity, I asked him how it all worked. He told me that it's all related to satanic rituals and involves invoking certain dark forces, completely against religious teachings. He shared some incantations with me, and they were quite disturbing. They involved mixing religious words with satanic phrases to create certain spells. I then asked him what else he did with this knowledge. He told me that he performed rituals to summon spirits, sometimes to harm others, even conducting sacrifices, what we call ban. After hearing all this, I felt a responsibility as his older brother figure to warn him. I told him to stop doing such things as they were harmful. He replied, saying he wouldn't do it anymore. But I wasn't fully convinced by his words. Still, I didn't care much, thinking it's his life, and if he wants to continue, it's up to him. That incident was around 6 or 7 months ago, and nothing much happened after that. But now, something strange has happened again, just a few weeks ago. One of the older brothers in our neighborhood had been trying to win over a girl he liked for a while. Despite his efforts, he couldn't get close to her for various reasons: family status, societal expectations, and other factors. It was clear that their relationship wasn't going to work out. One day, I was with that older brother and my close friend, the one who had the black magic conversation with me 6 months earlier. We were talking, and the older brother mentioned how he had tried everything to get closer to the girl, but failed. So, he was now thinking about turning to black magic for help. He had tried other methods before, but none had worked, so now he was considering this. At that moment, my friend, the one who had practiced black magic, suddenly spoke up, saying he knew someone who could help. He mentioned a young guy named Saqib's younger brother who was into these kinds of things. The older brother then turned to me and asked if it was true. I told him about the kid who had come to learn dancing from me and how he had said he practiced black magic. The older brother asked me to arrange a meeting with the kid. Since I had a strong interest in paranormal things, I thought about it, even though I knew it was wrong. Initially, I said no, knowing that getting involved in such things is bad. But then, under some pressure, I felt compelled to go along with it. Here is the English translation of the text. The person who was doing it, I went to him. I took him with me, and then I just quietly observed what was happening, because I didn't have anything to say at that point. I was there just to watch and understand, because we all know the fear involved in this, right? Then they talked about what could or couldn't be done. He did different things like using charms and talismans. Initially, he said he would try it the Islamic way. I'm not explaining the process, but whatever it was, something had to be done. At that time, I was the one with the bike among the three of us. So after midnight, I took the lead on the bike just for the experience. All right, let's see what happens. Nothing happened. So then we went back to the guy again with that brother. Since I was introduced through his younger brother, he kept me in all the conversations. I also stayed involved because this was a huge opportunity for me, right? I could experience this closely. All right, I went with them. Then, on the final attempt, he decided to do something forbidden, kufri. He wrote various things, and I was right next to him. He couldn't say much to me because I'm older, and he respects me. I took pictures of the writings and went through his books. A funny thing is that I asked him for permission to read the books. He said, okay, fine. The first book I picked was related to Hindu Tantra practices. There, I read something interesting. It made me wonder how it is possible that someone says a mantra and it works. Even in our religion, it's similar, like when we recite a surah or dua, blow on a sick person, and they get better. For example, we know that if we recite Surah Fatiha and blow on a snake bite, it can heal. This concept works for many of us. So the book explained that in ancient Hindu communities, they discovered that if we utter certain words, the vibrations from our voice create interactions with the air, and something miraculous happens. This power comes from correctly pronouncing certain words. This friction produces something supernatural. However, it should be done for good reasons only. I read all the mantras and found them to be bizarre. It was all about what to do and where to go. I kept reading because this was a big opportunity for me to observe this closely. Finally, he gave me a written ya. I even have a picture of it. He told my friend, not me, that after midnight, he should take it to a specific cremation ground and bury it in the ashes where bodies are burned. As usual, since it was far from our house and very late at night, a bike was needed, and I was the biker. So, I was called, as usual. I went along to observe from a distance. When we reached the cremation ground, it was past midnight. There were three of us, as we had been from the start, me, the older brother, and my close friend. There were no other options. We were right next to the main road. Someone had to hold the light, another person had to do the burying, and the third had to stay by the bike. My friend was scared and didn't want to go, so he stayed by the bike. Eventually, unwillingly, I had to hold the light and help. The distance between the spot and the road was only 4 or 5 meters. Then the strange part started. While my friend was burying the thing, I suddenly heard a conversation, like two people talking very clearly, as if they were very close. Since this was not a socially accepted activity, I was very scared. I thought someone was coming, so I lifted the light to check. We were right by the main road. I kept hearing the conversation between two people speaking in deep voices, and I told my brother, maybe someone is coming, or someone is near us. The sound was getting louder, as if someone was approaching. Let me add that the cremation ground was surrounded by empty fields, and there were houses far away. I told him about the sound, and he heard it too. He shone the light everywhere, but there was no one. Still, we could hear two people talking. The nearest house was far away. The whole situation was surprising. We didn't stay there long. After about a minute, we rushed back to the road. Unfortunately, or fortunately, no one came. So, no one saw it. Then, as usual, we started the bike to head back, as the task was done. We were discussing why we didn't see the person we had heard. I was telling my brother, why didn't we see the person speaking? Then my friend, who was watching over the bike, said, "What sound?" I replied, "Didn't you hear the two people talking?" He said, "No, I didn't hear anything." That's when it clicked in our heads. Why didn't he hear it when he was standing so close to us, just 3 or 4 meters away? The sound was so loud that if we heard it, he should have too, but he didn't hear a thing, and both of us were shocked. So what really happened? We started guessing that something must have happened there. Maybe there was something there that didn't want us to do what we were doing. It seemed like the voices were trying to scare us away. showing us a conversation to make us leave. Anyway, we had a lengthy conversation about it, and both my brother and I were surprised. He kept saying, "I didn't hear anything. How did you guys hear it?" The funny thing is, while we were heading home on the bike, which was quite a distance away from the city, as I mentioned earlier, our house was far from the city. We were in a completely different area, so naturally, there was a bit of distance. My friend was riding the bike, I was in the middle, and my brother was at the back. At one point, my brother said to me, "Saqib, why does it sound like someone is running behind me? I can hear footsteps." I was like, "What are you saying?" I turned to look behind, and at that moment, the bike's speed started to decrease. If you've ever ridden a bike, you'll know what I mean. Like when the fuel is almost finished and the engine slows down. It's like when the fuel is low, and even though you push the throttle, the bike only moves a little before slowing down again. That's exactly what happened. When I turned around after hearing him say that someone was running behind him, there was nothing there. But the bike was slowing down, as if it was running out of fuel. I wasn't scared immediately, because as we all know, when something paranormal happens, we don't feel scared instantly. Instead, we feel surprised. I told them, maybe the bike's fuel is running low and we'll have to walk the rest of the way. I was mentally preparing them that we might have to walk home through the night. But a little while later, the bike started running smoothly again, and everything seemed fine. We stopped the bike and checked. The fuel was perfectly fine. There was no issue. So, what really happened? I realized there was definitely something there. We all know that when the environment around us changes, or when we feel a weight on the bike, something paranormal is happening. That's what it felt like. My brother heard something behind him, and when we turned around, the bike started slowing down. Maybe we crossed some zone, and after passing it, everything became normal again. So, we left and returned home, and that was it. The main thing was that we had gone to the cremation ground, and we all know that such places are often haunted, especially after midnight. We did something wrong by being there and disturbing whatever was present. Of course, those spirits or entities wouldn't have liked it. Afterward, I felt a sense of guilt and thought that I shouldn't have gone along with it. Ultimately, I was just as guilty. I don't know what happened to the others after that because I completely distanced myself from that whole thing. It wasn't right, and I realized that my curiosity should have ended there. It's not right to stay too close. Maybe I crossed the line. So I didn't go back to the guild because, honestly, I don't have any news about what happened to them. They weren't particularly close relatives or big brothers, so I have no way of knowing what happened. So that was my story. One more thing. I left something out in the middle. When I told my younger brother about my friend who practices black magic, I apologized for calling him my friend. When I mentioned it to him, he said, "Okay, brother, no problem. You can bring him along." I thought about it and realized that I've read a lot and heard many stories about this, and Ghost FM has some bad influences, so I decided to step back. I thought there was no need for me to get involved, and I had no desire to. I'd rather sit back and watch, and that's fine. It's not like I'm practicing or need to keep anything at home. And that's the story. I hope you liked it. If you enjoyed it, please share. That's it for now. I have many more stories about myself and my family, so if you like it, I might feel inspired to share more. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us this long, and I wish you all the best. To get updates about this YouTube channel, please subscribe. I hope we walk together for a long time. For today, I'm signing off here. Everyone, stay well, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay connected with Shadows of the Unknown USA.